ज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। नमामि विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रस्थाय भूतले श्रीमते रमापतिस्वामिनिति नाम्ने। नमामि विष्णुपदाय कृष्णप्रस्थाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नाम्ने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंदा श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंदा। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे, हरे कृष्ण. So we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 3, chapter 7, and today's text is text number 8. So this chapter is entitled Further Inquiries by Vidura. So this past few chapters, we've been listening to the conversation between Vidura and Maitreya Rishi. So going back, the context is Krishna has just left the planet, and Vidura has seen Uddhava, and Uddhava said, "Oh, you have these questions. I suggest you go speak with Maitreya Rishi. He is much more senior than me." And we understand from the purports that Uddhava was perhaps spiritually his senior, but according to etiquette, he was referred to Maitreya Rishi. And we see that why is this important? Because it is said that at that time, when Maitreya was listening to the conversation between Krishna and Uddhava, it wasn't necessarily that he was a pure devotee, but over the course of that conversation and this conversation, Prabhupada will write that, he is also a pure devotee of the Lord. So, and why is that point important? We'll see that in this purport also. So also just another context for this particular verse is that Vidura has asked questions about creation, and then Maitreya has answered them. Now in this chapter, Vidura has further questions, and these are specifically questions about how does something that is spiritual in nature become something that is material. Specifically, we hear him ask few things, like he says, the spiritual soul, the spirit soul, living entity is spiritual in nature. How does it become covered by matter? Then he says, how does the Supreme Lord, who is self-satisfied, how does he have this impetus for creation? We understand, like children may have desire to play and they may do things, but the Lord is self-satisfied. Then he's asking, well, and this whole thing about the Lord being unchanging, how does this unchangeable, how does he create a world that is changing? How the world that is covered by matter? So this is all this dichotomy of spirit and matter. How does this turn into that? And then so yeah, these were some questions, and basically the bottom line is, how does this material world unfold? And these are core theological questions. So like this past verse that we saw before was one of the core question of the fall of the jiva, right? How does the living entity get conditioned? How does it become material from what it is spiritual in nature? So these are core theological questions. And so this is kind of like the background, and now we'll get into the verses. Prabhu, should I share the screen?
You may share, Mataji.
Yeah, I can. Okay. Sorry, I should have pulled up the verse. Canto 3. Okay. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Canto 3, Chapter 7, text number 8. Shri Shukha Uvacha Saitham Chodita Kshatra Tattva Jignasuna Munihi Pratyaha Bhagavat Chittaha Smayan Nivagata Smayaha. Shri Shukha Uvacha Saitham Chodita Kshatra Tattva Jignasuna Munihi Pratyaha Bhagavat Chittaha Smayan Nivagata Smayaha. Saitham Chodita Kshatra Tattva Jignasuna Munihi Pratyaha Bhagavat Chittaha Smayan Nivagata Smayaha. Shri Shukha Uvacha, Shri Shukadev Goswami said, Saha, he, Maitreya Muni, Itham, in this way, Choditaha, being agitated, Kshatra, by Vidura, Tattva Jignasuna, by one who was anxious to inquire to know the truth, Munihi, the great sage, Pratyaha, replied, Bhagavat Chittaha, God conscious, Smayan, wondering, Iva, as if, Gatasmyaha, without hesitation. Translation. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, O king, Maitreya, being thus agitated by the inquisitive Vidura, at first seemed astonished, but then he replied to him without hesitation, since he was fully God conscious. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Since the great sage Maitreya was filled with God consciousness, he had no reason to be astonished at such contradictory questions by Vidura. Therefore, although as a devotee, he externally expressed surprise, as if he did not know how to reply to those questions, he immediately became perfectly settled and properly replied to Vidura. Yasmin vijñāte sarvam evam vijñātam bhavati. Mundakopanishad 1.3. Anyone who is a devotee of the Lord knows about the Lord to some extent, and devotional service to the Lord makes him able to know everything by the grace of the Lord. Although a devotee may apparently express himself to be ignorant, he is full of knowledge in every intricate matter. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. But basically, like I said, the stage of this, the verse is that questions have been asked, and now Maitreya Rishi is going to answer them. But at this juncture, what we are hearing is that it seemed like there was an astonishment or a hesitation or surprise, or rather, it says no hesitation, but he replied to him without hesitation. So there was astonishment, and then he immediately starts answering because he was fully God conscious. So for me, one of the takeaway points from here was that this whole thing about when we know the Supreme Lord, we understand everything there is to be known, be it the material world or be it the spiritual world. And like I said before, these are core theological questions. How does material world come from something that is spiritual in nature? How does the living entity, which is spiritual in nature, is covered by Maya? And this whole creation is so deep and profound, and the Lord's relationship with this creation or the material world is so deep and profound. So is there a distinction? And so the impulse of the also is that the Lord, who's spiritual in nature, okay, he might do it out of Leela and he may not be covered by matter, but the living entity is also spiritual in nature, which is a part of Krishna. How does it become covered by matter? And Vidura is astonished. And so we see that Vidura, he presents himself and he regards himself with such humility. And so this we may also, the takeaway for me would be that this whole amanitvam, adambitvam comes to life, right? So humility is coming out in this case from Vidura's side. And he is presenting himself as bewildered. because like we saw yesterday, if there are not people who are beyond this bewildered state, if they are not beyond this liberated state, who will answer us? So he's taking the position of bewildered, and Maitreya Rishi is going to so-called like uncover his eyes of bewilderment. So, and one of the things is that the other point to take away is this Yasmin Vijñate Sarvam Evam Vijñatam Bhavati, which is coming in this Mundaka Upanishad. And elsewhere in 4th canto, in that Dhruvamara chapter, Prabhupada writes that knowledge received through the transcendental, causeless mercy of the Lord is so perfect that by that knowledge, the devotee becomes acquainted with all different manifestations of the Lord. So in that purport, it's a long purport, so I'm going to read an excerpt of it. So Prabhupada writes, if one simply understands the original cause, Krishna, the cause of all causes, then naturally everything that needs to be understood, everything else is understood, although it may be presented in different varieties. By the understanding of the original cause of different varieties, one can understand everything. If we understand Krishna, the original cause of everything, we do not necessarily need to separately study the subsidiary varieties. Therefore, from the beginning, it is said, Satyam Param Dhimahi. One has to concentrate one's understanding on the supreme truth, Krishna or Vasudev. The word Vasudev indicates the supreme personality of Godhead, who is the cause of all causes. Matsthani sarva bhutani na chaham teshvavasthitaha. This is the summary of the phenomenal and the noumenal philosophy. The phenomenal world depends on the noumenal existence. Similarly, everything exists by the virtue of the potency of the Supreme Lord. Although due to our ignorance, the Supreme Lord is not perceived in everything. So, to summarize, this world, the material world, comes from what is the spiritual world. So if we understand our source, we have understood the, so if we understood the cause, we have understood the effect. So if we have understood Krishna, then we have understood anything that is to be known about the material world. And I was linking this with the 15th chapter that we are going to do in our camp, which is the Yoga of the Supreme Person, the Purushottam Yoga. So there also, in text, the last two verses, 15th chapter, 19th and 20th verses, I'll just read the translation of chapter 15, 19 and 20. Whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is the knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me, O son of Bharata. 20. This is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures, O sinless one, and it is disclosed now by me. Whoever understands this will become wise and his endeavors will know full perfection. So we have also seen, so the progression of this verse is this, Krishna talks about the Urdhva Mula Matha Shakam. So he talks about this upside down banyan tree, which is where we are, the material world, the created world, and it seems so complicated. And we can't know, does it start, where does it end? Like, we might have heard about Brahmaji's exploration of the stem. Is there even a beginning to it? And he sits down on the lotus and, he meditates, like how he hears the word tapa, he meditates and how he understands so when he understands the Lord, he understands how to create. So coming back to the 15th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the material world is described, but then Krishna starts describing about that world where there is no need of sun or moon because it is self-effulgent. And then he invites us, he is exhorting us to come to him. And then he's saying, I sit in your heart and I am giving you remembrance. I'm giving you the knowledge. And yes, there is forgetfulness, but I am also the source of these Vedas. And who is to be known by understanding these Vedas? I am to be known, O Arjuna. And so he says, yes, you might be in this quagmire of this material world, but I am to be known, because knowing him is understanding about everything else in the world. And to summarize this whole thing, we have heard about this pastime of Srila Prabhupada, where these many times reporters would come in and interview him, and they would say, oh, Prabhupada this, oh, Prabhupada or that. And so, but this time one person said, oh, Swamiji, do you know how many windows there are in the Empire State Building? And Prabhupada said, no, I do not. But then he says, how many drops are there in a mirage? So what is the point in understanding, or like, we may not know the intricacies of, like, I don't know, atomic physics or something else, but understanding the basis of the material world, material world, that is the spiritual world, is understanding everything. And so Prabhupada shared that, by that, in that interview, he said that there is no existence of mirage. Like, is there even a permanence to it? What is even the point of knowing that? And so to know how many drops there are in a mirage is pointless. So, so these are my two takeaways. One is that Vidura has presented himself humbly. He's asking some core theological questions, and he's presenting himself as if he's bewildered. And we can take it that, yes, these two great personalities are having a conversation. In one way, it is answering our own questions, our own, basis. And finally, this point about Maitreya Rishi, how he is able to answer him just because he is, let me read the translation again. O king, Maitreya, being thus agitated by the inquisitive Vidura, at first seemed astonished, but then he replied to him without hesitation, since he was fully God conscious. So I would like to end my part of speaking. If anyone has any thoughts or corrections or questions, please do share away.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Thank you so much. The short class. So, actually, I mean, the questions are very, I mean, of course, logical or very sick, but actually, Vidra asking those questions. I mean, of course, I mean, as you mentioned, that it is for our benefit that he is asking on our behalf. But actually, it's like, I mean, very difficult to even understand, right? I mean, as you said, I mean, from last few verses, I mean, even I'm getting puzzled with this. I mean, topic. I mean, the a child is okay. I mean, but the Lord is actually knows it, but still, uh, uh, is. I mean, for his pastimes, he's performing. I think something like that he says in the earlier verses, right? I mean, but
Yeah.
it's very. Of course, he cannot come under control of these modes which are created by him. I
Yeah.
think Prabhupada gives various examples and all. But I mean, any specific reason? I mean, Vidura is asking these questions at this time. I'm just trying to link Mataji because from his earlier, whatever he heard about the Lord leaving this planet and all, I'm just trying to connect the whole thing. So, why is he asking this question now? So,
It seemed like because he was earlier the discussion was about creation, right? Like, the Lord being the primary creator, then Brahmaji. So suddenly something that is spiritual, and now we have something material in our
that
hands,
way.
right? And so how is this connection happening? And I think I don't know, when you just spoke, one of the thoughts that came to my mind was, I have often heard that, in Japa retreats, for instance, we've heard that, how one of the offenses is considering something spiritual to be material, like the holy names of the Lord, the deities of the, word forms of the Lord. Those are all spiritual in nature, and we consider them to be material. So in one sense, it is our own point of view, our consciousness, our desires, where we are at the moment. I'll come back to that, but I'm also having another thought here. So a couple of things. One was, because we are going to do 15 chapter in the camp, my consciousness is invested in that at the moment. But this whole upside down banyan tree, when it is discussed, and then you're taught the third and fourth, where we are asked to cut down the tree with detachment. So the tree, the material world, where does it rest on? So the reflection of the tree is resting on the water, right? So similarly, the material world rests on our desires. So Gauranga Darshan Prabhu was saying in one class, he said that if we don't have material desires, then for us, the material world does not exist. For us, it's only the spiritual world that is existing. So in one sense, the spiritual world is what is the reality. The material world is the reflection. And for us, if our consciousness is there is no material desire, then this is what we see. We see the reality. And but for those of us that are only seeing the reflection, spiritual world does not seem to exist, right? And so why does the Lord create this world? Is one point you had mentioned, is because of our own desires. The individual living entity's desires to lord it over the nature. And therefore, for us, the material world is being manifest. I don't know, did I even touch the point that you made?
Yes, Mataji, I think, yeah, you did I think you, I mean, one point I was looking actually, the reason that asking these questions, I think from because the Lord was talking about the creation and right? So I think that is how these questions are coming to Vidura at this time. So
Yeah, he's created it, but
yeah,
how, right? Like, it doesn't he get contaminated?
yeah,
Uh,
coming again in this world, yeah.
yeah. Actually, but I don't want to talk about something that's coming up in the next verse, which is why I kind of like stuck to my purport, even though something is coming to my mind. But yeah, because the 9th verse is a long purport and a lot of things will be discussed in that. And don't want to get into that at the moment.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Please
Hare
accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Guru Maharaj. That was a really profound statement about the material world not existing if we don't have desires. For us, it does not exist. I mean, that's really, hadn't thought about it from that standpoint at all.
Yeah.
Of course, to get there is very far, but
Yeah.
but yeah, that's what it is. I mean, then it is just the spiritual world. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it just takes that one moment. I remember reading Ravindra Swar Prabhu's article about this fall of the jiva long time back. But he essentially talks about what Prabhupada says about the dream, right? So we are in this dream, the tiger is chasing us, we are sweating, our legs are weak, and we feel all of that. But it just takes that one moment for us to wake up and realize, that was just a dream.
Yeah.
And the reality is that I am safe. I'm on my bed, I'm safe, there is no tiger, my legs aren't hurting. And so this whole material existence is like that, like it is that moment of, or Prabhupada's moment of God consciousness, pure Krishna consciousness. So, yeah, a moment can be powerful. Even though it is not my reality, I trust that it is, people have experienced it.
Yeah, and it is kind of something substantial to aim towards as well, in a way, right? And it is, because sometimes it's like a little so bewildering. What is it? I mean, going to, although Krishna has talked about the spiritual world in so many verses, but still it's like, to really fathom or grasp what it is. But yeah, I mean, this is something that we can probably at least think about, aim for, snap out of these desires, snap out of this dream.
Actually, one thing when you were speaking, another thought that came to my mind was last week I was at a workshop. It was a different workshop, but then there was a principle that was spoken, which is very Krishna conscious. So it was about some creating workshop. And they said they take one project. It could be anything, like maybe cleaning up your office desk or something. But just take that one project and do it for the sake of doing it, not for return on investment. And so if we are able to apply it here, like any devotional practice, even if this is, I'm saying this for myself, but like even if it is like 1 round a day, something really small, but if I can do that without expecting any return on investment, then that is pure bhakti. If I am expecting something to come out of it, any devotional process, then I'm still muddied up. I'm still in this reflection. But if I can, and so the way to, like you said, that the way to extricate out of ourselves is to do one activity, one small thing, a 5-minute or a 7 minutes of when japa time, for instance. And I think that is the start to purifying our desires.
Thank you, Mataji.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna. If there's nothing else, we can close for today. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.